I never thought owning rental property would land me in a courtroom fighting fraud charges against my own HOA. But when I opened that first invoice addressed to my tenants, I knew something was seriously wrong. My name is Xavier Ashford, and I own 3 townhouses in a planned community called Riverside Meadows in Gilbert, Arizona. I bought the properties 5 years ago as investment rentals, and for the most part, things had been smooth sailing. The HOA fees were reasonable at $200 a month, the amenities were decent, and the board generally stayed out of everyone's business. That all changed when Patricia Kramer became HOA president in January of last year. Patricia was everything you would expect from a stereotypical HOA tyrant. She was 52 years old with a blonde bob that never moved in the wind, probably held in place by industrial-strength hairspray. She drove a white Lexus SUV with custom plates that read HOPRES and wore matching velour tracksuits like it was still 2005. From day one of her presidency, she made it clear that she intended to run Riverside Meadows with an iron fist. The first sign of trouble came in March when my tenant in Unit 47B, Marcus Chen, called me around 7 in the evening. I was at home in Scottsdale, about 20 minutes away from the community, when my phone rang. "Xavier, did you authorize some kind of landscaping service?" Marcus asked. He sounded confused more than angry. "What do you mean?" "The HOA handles all the common area landscaping. That's included in the fees," I said, putting down the sandwich I had been eating. "No, I mean specifically for my unit. There's a bill here for $350 for enhanced landscape maintenance dated last month. It says it was for trimming the bushes by my front door and adding some mulch." I felt my stomach drop. I definitely did not authorize anything like that. "Did someone actually do work on your unit?" "That's the thing," Marcus said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Nobody touched anything. The bushes look exactly the same as they always have. I would have noticed if someone came and did yard work." "Send me a picture of that invoice. I'm going to call the HOA office first thing tomorrow morning." Marcus texted me the image within minutes. The invoice was printed on official Riverside Meadows HOA letterhead with Patricia Kramer's name listed as the authorizing party. It detailed services that allegedly occurred on February 15th, including bush trimming, mulch application, and seasonal flower rotation. The bill was addressed directly to Marcus Chen at his unit address, not to me as the property owner. I tried calling the HOA office the next morning, but nobody answered. Their voicemail said office hours were Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 2. It was Wednesday. I left a detailed message explaining the situation and asking for a callback. Thursday came and went with no return call. I drove over to the HOA office on Friday morning, a small building near the community entrance that also housed the fitness center and mailroom. A woman in her 30s with red hair sat behind the desk, typing on a computer. "Hi, I'm Xavier Ashford. I own 3 rental properties here, and I need to speak with someone about an erroneous bill sent to one of my tenants." The woman looked up with an expression that suggested she had been expecting me. "Oh yes, Mr. Ashford. Patricia said you might come in. She's actually in a meeting right now, but I can take a message." "I left 2 messages already. When can I actually speak with her?" "Patricia is very busy with HOA business. I can schedule you for next week." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. This is time sensitive. My tenant received a bill for services that were never performed. I need this resolved today. The red-haired woman, whose nameplate read Jennifer, clicked her mouse a few times. "According to our records, the services were performed as scheduled." If your tenant has concerns about the quality of work, they can submit a complaint form. The work was never done, at all. Nobody came to the property. Jennifer gave me a tight smile. Our contractors are very reliable. Perhaps your tenant simply wasn't home when the work was completed. The bushes look exactly the same as they did before. No mulch was added. No flowers were planted. This bill is fraudulent. Her smile disappeared. Mr. Ashford, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. If you continue to be aggressive, I'll have to ask you to leave. I was not being aggressive. My voice was firm but completely normal in volume. This was clearly a rehearsed response to shut down any challenges to whatever scheme they were running. I want to see the work orders and proof that this service was performed. Photos, contractor receipts, something. That information is confidential HOA business. You'll need to submit a formal request in writing and the board will review it at the next meeting. When is the next meeting? 3 weeks from now. Second Tuesday of the month. I left the office furious. This was clearly a runaround. I went directly to Marcus's unit and took my own photos of the landscaping, making sure to get timestamps on everything. The bushes were overgrown and clearly had not been trimmed in months. There was no fresh mulch anywhere, no new flowers, nothing that matched the invoice. Over the next week, I checked in with my other 2 tenants. Sarah Winters in Unit 52A and the Rodriguez family in Unit 61C both confirmed they had not received any similar bills. I felt a small sense of relief until April arrived. On April 7th, Sarah called me in a panic. Xavier, I just got a bill for $520 for something called emergency plumbing consultation. I never called a plumber. Nothing is wrong with the plumbing. My blood went cold. Send me the invoice immediately. This bill was similar to Marcus's, printed on HOA letterhead and authorized by Patricia Kramer. It claimed that on March 20th, a licensed plumber had been dispatched to Sarah's unit for a consultation regarding potential water pressure issues and preventative pipe inspection. The service was billed directly to Sarah, not to me. I called Sarah back. Did anyone knock on your door on March 20th? Anyone from maintenance or the HOA? No, definitely not. I work from home. I would have known if someone came by. Do you have any water pressure issues? Everything works perfectly fine. I took more photos, this time of Sarah's plumbing fixtures and water pressure. I even recorded a video of the faucets and toilets working normally. Then I sat down and drafted a formal letter to the HOA board, outlining both fraudulent invoices and demanding an immediate investigation. I sent it certified mail so they could not claim they never received it. The response came 10 days later, not from Patricia, but from the HOA's attorney, a man named Gerald Foster with a law firm in Phoenix. The letter was cold and corporate, stating that all services had been properly authorized and executed, according to community guidelines. It claimed that as a landlord, I had agreed to supplemental maintenance provisions when I purchased the properties, and that the HOA had the right to perform necessary upkeep and bill accordingly. I pulled out my original HOA documents from when I purchased the properties. I read every single page of the CC and Articles, the bylaws, and the rules and regulations. Nowhere did it say the HOA could unilaterally authorize services to individual units and bill the tenants. The only provisions about maintenance related to common areas and exterior upkeep that affected the community's appearance, which was already covered by the monthly HOA fees. Then came the 3rd invoice in May. This time it was to the Rodriguez family for pest control services that cost $400. Miguel Rodriguez called me immediately, and he was not as calm as my other tenants had been. Xavier, what the hell is this? Some company is saying they sprayed for bugs in April, but nobody came here. My wife is pregnant and we're very careful about chemicals. We would never let someone spray pesticides without talking to you first. I know, Miguel. I'm so sorry this is happening. I'm working on getting it resolved. Resolved? This is the third time. Your other tenants told me they got fake bills too. When is this going to stop? I'm taking legal action. I promise you, nobody has to pay these bills. The invoice says if we don't pay within 30 days, it goes to collections and affects our credit. My wife is crying because she's worried about our credit score. We're trying to buy a house next year. The fact that they were threatening my tenant's credit was the final straw. I immediately called every attorney I knew asking for referrals to someone who specialized in HOA law. I ended up with a recommendation for Deanna Walsh, a tough litigator based in Phoenix who had won several high-profile cases against abusive homeowners associations. I met with Deanna the following Monday at her office downtown. She was in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, and she had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had been through the legal trenches and come out victorious. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. I walked her through all 3 invoices, the lack of actual services performed, the HOA's refusal to provide documentation, and the threat to send the bills to collections. I showed her all the photos, the invoices, and my correspondence with the HOA. Diana listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "This is fraud. Clear-cut fraud. The question is whether it's just Patricia Kramer acting alone or if other board members are involved. What do we do?" First, we send a very serious cease and desist letter to the HOA, Patricia Kramer personally, and their attorney. We make it clear that if any more fraudulent invoices are sent, we're filing a lawsuit immediately. Second, we file complaints with the Arizona Attorney General's office and the Arizona Department of Real Estate. Third, we start gathering evidence for a civil lawsuit. How much is this going to cost me? Deanna gave me a number that made me wince, but she followed it up with something that made me feel better. If we can prove fraud, which I think we can, you can recover attorney's fees and potentially punitive damages. This isn't just about getting these fake bills dismissed. This is about holding them accountable so they don't do this to anyone else. You think they're billing other people too? Almost certainly. People who run these kinds of schemes don't stop at 3 properties. I want you to talk to your neighbors, other landlords in the community, and see if anyone else has received suspicious invoices. Over the next 2 weeks, I became an investigator. I posted in the Riverside Meadows Facebook group asking if anyone had received bills for services they didn't request. I knocked on doors. I hung flyers in the mailroom. What I discovered was shocking. At least 15 other homeowners and tenants had received fraudulent invoices over the past 4 months. The services varied wildly. Window cleaning that never happened, air duct cleaning that nobody authorized, door lock replacements that were never done, even a bill for community safety consulting that was completely vague and meaningless. The amounts ranged from $200 to over $800. Most people had just paid the bills, assuming the HOA had the authority to charge them. A few had complained but were given the same runaround I received. One elderly homeowner, a retired teacher named Helen, had paid over $1,500 in total for various fake services because she was afraid of what the HOA might do if she refused. Diana was right. This was not a few isolated incidents. This was a systematic fraud scheme. With this new information, Deanna drafted a comprehensive complaint. We were not just suing for the 3 fraudulent invoices sent to my tenants. We were filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone who had been defrauded by the Riverside Meadows HOA. The lawsuit named Patricia Kramer, the HOA board, and the HOA itself as defendants. We alleged fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion, and violations of Arizona consumer protection laws. The lawsuit was filed on June 3rd in Maricopa County Superior Court. I had never sued anyone before, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and righteous anger as Diana submitted the paperwork. This was really happening. The HOA's attorney, Gerald Foster, responded within a week with a motion to dismiss. His argument was that the HOA's governing documents gave the board broad authority to maintain the community, and that any billing disputes should be handled through the HOA's internal dispute resolution process, not through the courts. Deanna filed an opposition brief that systematically destroyed every one of his arguments. She pointed out that the HOA's governing documents said nothing about authorizing services to individual units without owner consent. She highlighted that the services were never actually performed, which meant this was not a billing dispute, but a fraud case. She attached sworn declarations from multiple homeowners and tenants attesting that they never received the services they were billed for. The hearing on the motion to dismiss was scheduled for July 15th. I took the morning off work and met Deanna at the courthouse downtown. The courtroom was one of those old, imposing spaces with wood paneling and high ceilings that made everything feel very serious and official. Judge Harold Martinez presided over the hearing. He was in his 60s with gray hair and a reputation for being fair but impatient with nonsense. Gerald Foster went first, making his arguments about HOA authority and internal dispute resolution. Judge Martinez interrupted him several times with pointed questions. "Counselor, are you saying the HOA can bill residents for services that were never performed?" "Your Honor, the services were performed according to HOA records." "But multiple residents are swearing under oath that nobody came to their properties. Where are the work orders? Where are the contractor receipts? Where are the before and after photos?" "That information is part of the HOA's confidential business records, Your Honor." Judge Martinez did not look impressed. "This is a court of law, Mr. Foster. Confidentiality does not override the need to prove that services were actually rendered when you're billing people hundreds of dollars." Diana's turn was much smoother. She methodically presented the evidence. The invoices, the photos showing no work was done, the sworn declarations, the pattern of fraudulent billing across multiple properties. She also pointed out that the HOA had refused to provide any documentation proving the services were performed despite multiple requests. "Your Honor, this is not a case about HOA authority. This is a case about fraud. The defendants billed residents for services that never happened, refused to provide proof that the services occurred, and threatened to damage people's credit if they didn't pay. That is textbook fraud, and it belongs in this court." Judge Martinez took less than 5 minutes to make his decision. Motion to dismiss is denied. This case will proceed to discovery. Mr. Foster, I strongly suggest your client start gathering whatever documentation they claim to have, because I'm going to want to see proof that these services were actually performed. We'll reconvene for a status conference in 30 days. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I had just won a major victory, but Diana tempered my enthusiasm. "This is just the beginning. Now comes discovery, which is where we get to demand all their records. That's when we'll really find out what's been going on." Discovery in a lawsuit is a formal process where both sides have to turn over relevant documents and answer questions under oath. Deanna sent out requests for production of documents, asking for all invoices, work orders, contractor agreements, payment records, board meeting minutes, and communications related to the fraudulent charges. The HOA's responses were due in 30 days. When they came in, they were almost comically inadequate. Instead of providing the requested documents, Gerald Foster sent objection after objection, claiming everything was privileged, confidential, or irrelevant. For the few documents they did provide, most were heavily redacted or simply copies of the same invoices we already had. Deanna filed a motion to compel, asking the judge to order the HOA to actually produce the documents. "They're hiding something," she told me over the phone. If they had legitimate records showing the services were performed, they would have turned them over immediately to make this case go away. The fact that they're stonewalling means there's something they don't want us to see. The motion to compel hearing was in September. Judge Martinez was even less patient this time. He ordered the HOA to produce all requested documents within 14 days or face sanctions. He also ordered Patricia Kramer to sit for a deposition, which meant she would have to answer questions under oath. The documents finally arrived at the end of September, and what they revealed was stunning. Deanna called me into her office to go over everything. "Xavier, this is worse than we thought. Look at this." She spread out dozens of invoices across her conference table. They showed a clear pattern. Starting in February, right after Patricia became HOA president, the HOA began issuing invoices for services to various homeowners. But here's what was fascinating. All the invoices referenced work performed by the same three contractors: Summit Property Services, Desert Maintenance Solutions, and Arizona Home Care Professionals. Deanna had done background checks on all three companies. They're all shell companies registered to the same address, a UPS store in Temp. They have no websites, no business licenses, no insurance, nothing. They're completely fake. So Patricia just made up companies and billed people. It gets better. Look at the bank records. The HOA's bank statements showed payments going out to these three fake companies, thousands of dollars each month. But Deanna had also subpoenaed Patricia Kramer's personal bank records, and there it was. Deposits coming into her personal account that matched almost exactly the amounts paid out by the HOA to the shell companies, usually within a few days of each other. She's been funneling HOA money into fake companies and then transferring it to herself. This isn't just fraud against the individual homeowners. She's been embezzling from the HOA's operating funds. I felt sick. How much are we talking about? Based on what I can see here, at least $60,000 over 8 months. And that's just what we can prove. It could be more. Patricia Kramer's deposition was scheduled for October 20th. I was allowed to attend as the plaintiff, though Deanna warned me to stay quiet and let her do the talking. We met at Gerald Foster's law office in a small conference room with a court reporter present. Patricia showed up in a cream-colored pantsuit, her blonde bob as perfect as ever, but I could see the stress around her eyes. She was sworn in and the deposition began. Deanna started with basic background questions, then slowly worked her way toward the heart of the matter. "Mrs. Kramer, can you explain the HOA's policy for authorizing services to individual homeowner units?" Patricia shifted in her seat. "If the board determines that a unit needs maintenance that affects the community's appearance or safety, we have the authority to authorize necessary services." "And how is that determination made?" "The board reviews each situation on a case-by-case basis." Deanna slid a document across the table. "This is the invoice sent to Marcus Chen for landscaping services. Can you show me in the board meeting minutes where this service was discussed and approved?" Patricia glanced at the document, then at Gerald Foster. Her attorney spoke up. Mrs. Kramer does not need to have specific board approval for routine maintenance matters. So you're saying Mrs. Kramer can unilaterally authorize hundreds of dollars in charges without board approval? For routine matters, yes. Deanna pulled out more invoices. What about this $500 plumbing consultation? Or this $400 pest control service? Are those also routine matters that don't require board approval? Patricia was starting to look uncomfortable. Those were all necessary services. Necessary for what? Mr. Chen's bushes were never trimmed. Miss Winters never had any plumbing issues. The Rodriguez family never had pest problems. Can you explain why these services were necessary when there were no actual problems? I was being proactive. Preventative maintenance. Without asking the homeowners or tenants first. The HOA has the authority to maintain the properties. Diana let that hang in the air for a moment, then changed tactics. Mrs. Kramer, how did you select the contractors for these services? Summit Property Services, Desert Maintenance Solutions, and Arizona Home Care Professionals. They were recommended. By whom? I don't recall specifically. Did you verify that these companies were licensed and insured? Patricia hesitated. They provided credentials. Can you produce those credentials? I would have to check the files. Deanna pulled out the business registration documents for the shell companies. Mrs. Kramer, all three of these companies are registered to the same address, a UPS store mailbox. Did you know that? Patricia's face went pale. No. Did you ever meet with representatives from these companies in person? No, everything was handled via email. Can you provide copies of those emails? Another hesitation. I would have to check. Mrs. Kramer, do you know who owns these three companies? No, Diana leaned forward. You authorized payments totaling $60,000 to companies you never verified, never met with in person, and know nothing about. Is that your testimony? Gerald Foster interrupted. Asked and answered. But the damage was done. Deanna had established that Patricia had no legitimate basis for authorizing these services or selecting these contractors. The deposition continued for 3 more hours. Deanna asked about the bank transfers, the HOA's financial controls, whether any other board members knew about these services. Patricia's answers became increasingly evasive and contradictory. By the end, it was clear she was in serious trouble. After the deposition, Deanna and I walked to a coffee shop down the street. That went better than I expected, she said. She's going to have a very hard time explaining those bank transfers. I think we need to bring in law enforcement. What do you mean? This isn't just a civil matter anymore. She's committed wire fraud, embezzlement, possibly money laundering. These are serious crimes. We need to report this to the FBI and the Arizona Attorney General's office. The thought of federal law enforcement getting involved made this all feel very real and very serious. But Diana was right. This had gone beyond a simple HOA dispute. Patricia Kramer had been running a criminal enterprise. Deanna made the calls that afternoon. She contacted the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division and the Arizona Attorney General's Fraud Unit. She provided copies of all the evidence we had gathered. The fake invoices, the shell company registrations, the bank records showing the money trail, and the deposition transcript. Within a week, 2 FBI agents came to Diana's office to interview me. Special Agent Lisa Torres and Special Agent Mark Harrison were both in their 30s, professional and thorough. They asked detailed questions about how I discovered the fraud, what the HOA had told me, and what other victims I knew about. Mr. Ashford, how many other homeowners do you believe were affected by this scheme? Agent Torres asked. At least 15 that I know of personally, but there could be more. A lot of people just paid the bills without questioning them. Do you have contact information for these other victims? Yes, I can provide everything. Agent Harrison leaned forward. We're going to need to execute search warrants on the HOA office and Mrs. Kramer's home. This is now a federal investigation. Your civil lawsuit can continue, but we'll be running a parallel criminal investigation. The search warrants were executed on November 2nd. I was not present, but Deanna got updates from her contacts at the FBI. Agents seized computers, files, and financial records from both the HOA office and Patricia's house. They also interviewed other board members and the HOA's bookkeeper. What they found was even more extensive than we had initially discovered. Patricia had been running this scheme for almost a year, not just 8 months. She had created 5 different shell companies, not 3. The total amount embezzled was over $120,000. She had been extremely careful to keep the individual invoices small enough that people would just pay without much fuss. But the cumulative effect was massive. Several other board members were implicated as well. The vice president, a man named Thomas Reed, had known about the fake invoices and had received kickbacks for staying quiet. The treasurer, Janet Morrison, had deliberately failed to reconcile the accounts properly to hide the missing money. On November 19th, Patricia Kramer was arrested at her home. The federal charges included wire fraud, mail fraud, and money laundering. Thomas Reed and Janet Morrison were arrested the same day as co-conspirators. The mugshots made the local news, and suddenly everyone in Gilbert was talking about the Riverside Meadows HOA scandal. My phone did not stop ringing. News reporters wanted interviews. Other homeowners associations wanted to know how to prevent similar fraud. Other victims called asking to join the lawsuit. It was overwhelming. The criminal case moved forward quickly. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution had such overwhelming evidence that they were not willing to offer much. In January, Patricia pleaded guilty to all charges. At her sentencing hearing in February, the judge showed no mercy. I attended the sentencing with Deanna and several other victims. Patricia stood before the judge looking nothing like the confident HOA president I had first met. She looked small, defeated, wearing an orange jumpsuit because she had been denied bail. The judge spoke sternly. "Mrs. Kramer, you held a position of trust within your community. Your neighbors elected you to lead their homeowners association, to manage their money responsibly, to make decisions in their best interest. Instead, you systematically defrauded them, stealing over $120,000 to fund your personal lifestyle. You showed no remorse, no conscience, no concern for the people you were hurting. Some of your victims were elderly retirees on fixed incomes. Others were young families trying to build their lives. You threatened their credit, their financial security, and their peace of mind, all so you could have more money in your bank account." Patricia was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, though Deanna told me we would probably never see most of that money since Patricia had already spent it. Thomas Reed got 3 years. Janet Morrison got 2 years and 6 months. All 3 were permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The civil lawsuit settled in March. The HOA's insurance company, facing overwhelming evidence of fraud and the criminal convictions, agreed to pay out a settlement that covered all the fraudulent invoices, legal fees, and punitive damages. Every victim received full compensation plus additional damages for the stress and harm caused. I received a settlement check that covered all 3 fake invoices sent to my tenants, all my attorney fees, and an additional $15,000 in damages. More importantly, all my tenants were made whole and their credit was never affected. The Riverside Meadows HOA underwent a complete restructuring. A new board was elected, new financial controls were put in place, and an independent auditor was hired to review all transactions quarterly. The community manager position was upgraded to require professional certification and bonding. I met with the new HOA president, a retired accountant named Robert Chen who happened to be Marcus's father, to discuss the changes. We sat in the renovated HOA office, which had been repainted and reorganized to feel more welcoming. "Xavier, I want you to know that we're committed to making sure nothing like this ever happens again," Robert said. "We've implemented dual signature requirements for any expenditure over $500. All service contracts require competitive bids and board approval. And we're publishing detailed financial reports every month so everyone can see where their money is going." "I appreciate that, Robert. I was seriously considering selling these properties after everything that happened. I hope you'll stay. We need good landlords who care about their tenants and their properties. What Patricia did was an aberration, not the norm. Most HOAs are run by honest people trying to maintain their communities." I thought about it. "I'll stay, but I'm going to be watching the finances very carefully." Robert smiled. "Good. We want owners who pay attention. That's how we prevent this from happening again." Over the following months, life in Riverside Meadows slowly returned to normal. The news coverage died down. The scandal became a cautionary tale shared at other HOA meetings across Arizona. Property values, which had dipped slightly during the investigation, recovered as word spread about the new management and stronger controls. Marcus, Sarah, and the Rodriguez family all stayed as tenants. Miguel and his wife had their baby, a healthy girl they named Sophia. I gave them a discount on rent for 3 months as an apology for everything they had been put through, even though it was not my fault. Helen, the elderly teacher who had paid over $1,500 in fake bills, used her settlement money to take a vacation to visit her grandchildren in Oregon. She sent me a postcard thanking me for standing up to the HOA. "You gave me back my faith that people still fight for what's right," she wrote. Diana Walsh became something of a local celebrity in HOA law circles. She was invited to speak at conferences and wrote an article about the case for a legal journal. We stayed in touch, and she helped me review the HOA's new governing documents to make sure there were adequate protections against future abuse. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons. First, always read the fine print and understand what authority your HOA actually has. Second, document everything. The photos and records I kept were crucial to building the case. Third, do not be intimidated by official-looking letterhead and legal threats. Patricia counted on people being too scared or confused to fight back. Most importantly, I learned that standing up against fraud and corruption, even when it is difficult and expensive, is worth it. Not just for yourself, but for all the other victims who might not have the resources or knowledge to fight back on their own. One evening in late spring, I was at Marcus's unit doing a routine inspection when he offered me a beer on his patio. We sat watching the Arizona sunset, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and purple. "You know, Xavier, when I first got that invoice, I almost just paid it," Marcus said. "It was only $350, not worth the hassle, right? I'm glad you called me instead." "Me too." I keep thinking about how many people must have paid these fake bills at other HOAs and never said anything. Patricia probably would have kept going for years if you had not fought back. Deanna says that's how most fraud works. Small amounts, lots of victims, counting on people not making waves. Marcus took a sip of his beer. Well, you made waves. You made a whole damn tsunami. We both laughed. It felt good to laugh about it now that it was over. The final piece of closure came in June, exactly 1 year after I filed the lawsuit. I received a letter from the FBI informing me that their investigation was complete and thanking me for my cooperation. Enclosed was a check for the witness fee they owed me. It was only $40, but I kept it as a souvenir. I framed the check and hung it in my home office, right next to a photo of the Riverside Meadows community sign. It served as a reminder that sometimes the systems we set up to protect our communities can be corrupted by bad actors, but they can also be fixed by good people willing to stand up and fight. Patricia Cramer would spend the next 6 years in federal prison thinking about the choices she made. Thomas Reid and Janet Morrison would serve their time as well. The HOA would continue operating, better and stronger than before, with transparency and accountability built into every decision. As for me, I continued managing my rental properties, but with a much more critical eye toward HOA operations. I started attending the monthly board meetings, reviewing the financial reports, and asking questions when something did not make sense. Other owners started doing the same. The new culture of transparency and oversight became the norm. I also became something of an informal advisor to other landlords in the area. People would reach out asking about red flags to watch for, how to vet HOA boards, and what to do if they suspected fraud. I always told them the same thing. Trust your instincts, document everything, and do not be afraid to get a lawyer involved if something seems wrong. One afternoon, I got a call from a landlord in Mesa who said his tenants received a suspicious invoice from their HOA. I walked him through the same steps I had taken. Verify whether the service was actually performed, take photos, request documentation from the HOA, and if they could not provide proof, contact an attorney immediately. You probably just saved me from going through what you went through, he told me gratefully. That's the point. We have to look out for each other. The HOA industry in Arizona changed after the Riverside Meadows case. The state legislature passed new laws requiring more financial transparency from HOAs, mandatory audits for communities over a certain size, and stronger penalties for board members who committed fraud. Real estate agents started including HOA fraud prevention in their buyer education materials. Deanna told me that she had been contacted by homeowners in California, Nevada, and Texas who were dealing with similar situations. The Riverside Meadows case became a template for how to investigate and prosecute HOA fraud. You started something bigger than just your case, she said. You changed how people think about HOA accountability. I never set out to be an activist or a crusader. I just wanted my tenants to not be ripped off by fake invoices. But sometimes standing up for what is right has ripple effects you never anticipated. 2 years after the lawsuit concluded, I was invited to speak at a real estate investors meeting in Phoenix. The organizer wanted me to share my experience and the lessons I learned. I was nervous about public speaking, but I agreed because I thought it might help others avoid similar situations. Standing at the podium looking at 200 faces, I started with the same words I had been thinking about for months. I never thought owning rental property would land me in a courtroom fighting fraud charges against my own HOA. But sometimes life puts you in situations where you have to decide whether to look the other way or stand up and fight. I told the whole story, from that first phone call with Marcus to Patricia's sentencing. I showed copies of the fraudulent invoices, explained the investigation process, and walked through how we proved the fraud. People listened intently, many taking notes. During the question and answer session, a woman in the back raised her hand. "How did you afford the legal fees? Most people can't pay tens of thousands of dollars to sue their HOA." "That's a great question." I was fortunate that Diana agreed to take the case with a contingency fee arrangement for the class action portion. But you're right, the initial costs were significant. That's why documentation is so important. If you have solid evidence of fraud, it's much easier to find an attorney willing to take the case because the odds of winning are high. Another man asked, "What if the HOA threatens to foreclose on your property for not paying the fees?" "That's a scare tactic. They can only foreclose for unpaid HOA dues, not for fraudulent charges. If they threaten foreclosure over a disputed bill, that's another form of harassment and can be used against them in court. Never let threats of legal action prevent you from challenging something that's wrong." After the presentation, several people came up to talk with me personally. Some shared their own HOA horror stories. Others asked for Diana's contact information. One older gentleman shook my hand firmly and said, "Thank you for doing what you did. These petty tyrants need to know they can't get away with this stuff." Life moved on. The Riverside Meadows community continued to thrive under honest leadership. Property values increased. New families moved in. The community pool and fitness center got upgrades funded by HOA dues that were actually used for their intended purpose. I eventually bought a fourth property in the community, a nice unit near the park that I renovated and rented to a young couple with a dog. The new HOA board approved the rental quickly with none of the hassles I might have expected. Robert Chen, still serving as president, welcomed the new tenants personally and gave them a welcome packet with accurate information about amenities and actual rules. "This is what an HOA should be," Robert told me when we ran into each other at the mailroom. "Helpful, transparent, serving the community, not using our position to enrich ourselves." "Patricia really did a number on this place," I said. She did. But in some ways her fraud made us stronger. Everyone pays attention now. Nobody takes the board's word without verification. It's probably the healthiest HOA in Arizona because of all the scrutiny. He had a point. The scandal had created a culture of accountability that most communities never develop until after something goes wrong. I kept tabs on Patricia through the federal prison system's inmate locator. She was serving her time at a minimum security facility in Texas, scheduled for release in 4 more years. Part of me felt sorry for her, throwing away her freedom and reputation for money she had already spent on luxury items and trips. But mostly, I felt satisfaction knowing that justice had been served. Marcus eventually bought his own home in a different community and moved out on good terms. Sarah got promoted at her job and relocated to California. The Rodriguez family, now with 2 kids, upgraded to a larger unit within Riverside Meadows. Each transition was smooth because the HOA functioned the way it was supposed to, facilitating community living rather than creating problems. I hired a property manager to help with the day-to-day operations of my 4 units. This freed up my time while still allowing me to stay involved in major decisions. The property manager, a competent woman named Angela, appreciated that I actually read the financial reports and asked informed questions. "Most landlords just want to collect rent and ignore everything else," she said. "It's refreshing to work with someone who cares about the details." The lawsuit settlement money, combined with the rental income from 4 well-maintained properties, put me in a strong financial position. I started thinking about expanding my real estate portfolio to other areas, but I remained cautious about HOA-governed properties. I always conducted thorough due diligence, reviewing multiple years of financial statements and meeting with board members before purchasing. Deanna and I had coffee every few months to catch up. She had taken on several more HOA fraud cases, inspired by the success of the Riverside Meadows lawsuit. "You opened the floodgates," she joked. "Turns out there's a lot of corruption in HOA land. Are they all as bad as Patricia? Some are worse, some are just incompetent rather than criminal. But they all have the same root problem: too much power, too little oversight, and homeowners who don't pay attention until it's too late." "So what's the solution?" Diana thought for a moment. "Education, transparency, and consequences." Homeowners need to understand that serving on an HOA board is a serious responsibility with legal obligations. Financial records should be readily accessible. And when someone commits fraud, they need to go to prison, not just get a slap on the wrist. Your case set a precedent that's making other board members think twice before pulling similar stunts. I felt proud of that. What started as a simple dispute over a fake invoice had turned into something much larger. A message that HOA board members are not untouchable, that fraud has consequences, and that ordinary homeowners have the power to fight back. 3 years after everything concluded, I was featured in a local newspaper article about HOA reform. The reporter interviewed me, Deanna, and Robert Chen about the Riverside Meadows case and its aftermath. The article ran on the front page of the real estate section with the headline, "How One Landlord's Fight Against HOA Fraud Changed Arizona Law." My parents called me after seeing the article. My dad, always practical, said, "I'm proud of you for standing up to them, but I hope you're done with lawsuits now." "I am definitely done with lawsuits," I assured him. "I just want to manage my properties in peace." But peace in an HOA is never guaranteed, and I remained vigilant. I attended board meetings regularly, reviewed every financial report, and encouraged my tenants to report anything suspicious immediately. The new culture of accountability at Riverside Meadows meant that problems were addressed quickly and transparently. One evening, sitting in my home office looking at the framed check from the FBI, I reflected on the entire experience. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. There were moments when I questioned whether fighting the HOA was worth it. But seeing Patricia convicted, my tenants compensated, and the entire community reformed made it all worthwhile. I thought about all the victims who had paid those fraudulent invoices without questioning them. Helen with her $1,500. The young couple who paid $800 for fake window cleaning. The retiree who paid $600 for air duct service that never happened. Without the lawsuit, they never would have gotten their money back. Patricia would have continued stealing until she got greedy and made a mistake large enough to trigger an automatic audit. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if Marcus had just paid that first invoice instead of calling me. Would I have noticed the pattern when Sarah and Miguel got billed? Or would I have just assumed it was legitimate HOA business? It was disturbing to think how close we came to Patricia getting away with it, but Marcus did call. I did investigate. Deanna did take the case. The FBI did prosecute. Justice was served, and the system worked the way it was supposed to work, even if it took time and effort. The experience changed how I approached everything related to property management and community governance. I became that guy who actually read the meeting minutes, who questioned line items in the budget, who asked for documentation. Some people probably found me annoying, but I did not care. The alternative was trusting blindly and hoping board members were honest. And I had learned that lesson the hard way. Years from now, when people talk about HOA horror stories, the Riverside Meadows fraud case will probably be mentioned as an example of corruption and accountability. Patricia Kramer will be a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. The shell companies, the fake invoices, the embezzlement, it all seems so obvious in retrospect, but fraud often does once it is exposed. What matters is that we caught it, we fought it, and we won. The community emerged stronger. The laws improved. Other potential fraudsters were deterred. And most importantly, the victims were made whole. I still own those 4 townhouses in Riverside Meadows. The HOA fees are still $200 a month. But now, I know exactly where that money goes because the financial reports are detailed and transparent. The board is composed of honest, dedicated volunteers who actually care about the community. And every new homeowner receives a welcome packet that includes information about financial transparency and how to report suspected fraud. On the anniversary of Patricia's sentencing, I drove through Riverside Meadows just to see how the community looked. The landscaping was immaculate, the amenities were well maintained, and families were enjoying the park and pool. It looked like a normal, happy neighborhood, which is exactly what it should be. I stopped by the community center where the HOA office was located. The bulletin board in the lobby displayed the monthly financial report, the meeting schedule, and contact information for all board members. Everything was transparent and accessible, a stark contrast to Patricia's secretive regime. Robert Chen was in the office sorting mail. He waved when he saw me. "Xavier, good timing. I was just about to send out the annual report. Want to review it before it goes out?" "Sure," I said, taking the document he offered. It was comprehensive, showing every dollar collected and spent, with categories clearly labeled and variance explanations for anything unusual. This was how an HOA should operate. "Looks good," I told Robert. "This level of detail is exactly what people need to see." "We learned from the best," he said with a wry smile. "Or should I say from the worst? Patricia taught us what not to do." We talked for a few more minutes about upcoming community events and routine maintenance projects. Everything was above board, properly budgeted, and approved by the board with input from homeowners. It was almost boring in its normalcy, which was perfect. Driving home that evening, I felt a sense of closure that had been building for years. The fight was over. The reforms were implemented. The community was thriving. Justice had been served. There was nothing left to do except move forward and make sure the lessons learned were not forgotten. I thought about Patricia sitting in that federal prison in Texas, serving time for her crimes. I wondered if she regretted her choices, if she understood the harm she had caused, or if she just felt sorry for herself for getting caught. I would probably never know, and it did not really matter. What mattered was that her scheme was stopped and could not hurt anyone else. The legal system worked slowly but effectively. The investigation was thorough, the prosecution was competent, the judge was fair, the sentence was appropriate. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it makes all the waiting worthwhile. I never imagined that buying rental properties would lead to federal court, FBI investigations, and criminal prosecutions. I never wanted to be the guy who sued his HOA or testified in fraud cases. But life does not always give you choices about the challenges you face. Sometimes you just have to stand up and do what is right, even when it is hard, expensive, and stressful. Looking back, I would make the same decisions again. Fighting Patricia's fraud was the right thing to do, not just for me and my tenants, but for everyone in the community and potentially other communities across Arizona. The ripple effects of that first phone call from Marcus about a fake $350 invoice led to laws being changed, communities being reformed, and criminals going to prison. That is the power of standing up against corruption, even when it seems small or insignificant. You never know where it might lead or who it might help. You just have to be willing to take that first step and see it through, no matter how long it takes or how difficult it becomes. And now, years later, sitting in my home office with that framed $40 FBI check on the wall, I can say with absolute certainty that it was worth every minute, every dollar, and every ounce of stress. Because at the end of the day, justice was served, and that matters more than anything else.